This is Chris Morrow at Comic-Con at Home, and I am remotely connected from the Tin Fish today. We're talking about the panel Decoding the Kirby Lee Dynamic. Hi guys, how are you?
Hey.
Hello.
Hello.
If you could introduce yourself and say where your home is.
Sure. I'm Rob Salkowitz. I'm calling in from Seattle. I was the moderator of the panel.
I'm Abraham Riesman. I'm a journalist. I wrote a biography of Stan Lee called True Believer that comes out later this year, and I'm based in Brooklyn.
I am Danny Fingeroth. I'm the author of A Marvelous Life, the amazing story of Stan Lee, and I'm in the Northeast U.S., a couple of different places.
I'm Fred Van Lente, also of Brooklyn. I wrote The Comic History of Comics and co-wrote the play King Kirby with
Crystal Skillman. I live with Fred
in
Brooklyn, but I was born in San Diego.
Very nice. Well, nice to meet y'all, and please tell me about the panel. How did it go?
I think we won, clearly. I mean, it won. It, it was sort of judged by technical knockout. It was looking a little sketchy there. Both Abraham and Danny had their moments, but I think overall,
I'm shocked at how much hair I grew between the panel and now. It's 2 minutes in between. It's astonishing.
So
I transferred it to you. I transferred mine to you.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
You're quite welcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was a great conversation. It's a tricky topic because anybody that knows anything about it has a pretty strong opinion on the subject. So I was lucky that we had informed people like Abraham and Danny and Fred and Crystal who had all written credible work on the subject and unearthed some interesting stuff that we could discuss beyond just the ordinary Stan versus Jack battle.
Yeah. So if you don't mind, it's the year of the freshman right now since it's at home, and if you can kind of just bring everyone into the conversation and say what is the issue there.
I guess the issue is we have these multi-billion-dollar characters that are in all the Marvel movies and TV shows and video games. And on multiple levels, I guess there's a question of who created them and what does creation mean and who gets credit for what and who gets money and how much for what and who gets pride of being able to say, I created that, my father created that, my grandfather created, so there's all these different, very emotional and nuts and bolts financial issues relating to who created the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Iron Man, Spiderman, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, at the highest level, all of these great characters were created through this collaboration between Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and the actual understanding of who contributed what to that creation. We know that Kirby was the visual storyteller. We know that Stan gave voice to the characters through his dialogue, but the particular magic that made those characters stand out in the world is, it's like this alchemy. And Stan Lee has been, over the years, not shy about claiming his share of that credit. And because he worked at Marvel and was an in-house employee, he was given a lot of that credit also institutionally, and Kirby has had to kind of fight for recognition. He's been a more lower key figure. Of course, he died in 1993, whereas Stan, 94, whereas Stan has been with us up until 2018. So just kind of redressing that balance, making people, I guess, in the world a little bit more aware of Kirby's contributions to that and his equal claim to authorship.
I would just say that there are varying claims here, and it's important to note that there is a possibility. I don't have a smoking gun. I wrote this biography. I don't have the official answer of conclusively what happened, but what Jack always claimed was that Stan really had nothing to do with creating the characters. I mean, he would obviously concede that Stan wrote the dialogue and the narration, but that was all after the fact from the actual creation, and Jack said Stan just didn't have anything to do with that. So I'm not saying I know that's necessarily the case, but we have to include that as a possibility.
completely different. I can't help but notice you only have one doll in your hand. Because one person is sort of the brand of and embodies the brand of Marvel and has been in all the films and voiced, narrated a lot of the cartoons, and so I think that's partly why it's easy to sort of paint Stan as the heavy, right, and sort of the bad guy, good guy formulation that Danny was talking about, simply because in terms of public awareness, it's a real David and Goliath type situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think the play also strove to do that, I think, was illuminating, or what we did in the human drama of it is that Jack is very much a dreamer, and he loves creating so much, and he does so with such quick skill and can create so much that he becomes lost in it. So the scenes that really dramatize in the later half of the play are when he realizes original artwork is being sold, without his permission, and where did it come from, and where did it go? And his wife says, it's a speech we worked on, I see you on lunchboxes and T-shirts and Frisbees. I see your work everywhere, but where are you? So it really, Jack, in our perspective, didn't sit and say, hey, I want to get my due from the very beginning. They both loved the act of creation, but Jack very much got lost in the autonomy and the fights and the different characters that he was creating, and he always believed in the next thing. He was so excited about New Gods, obviously, which now it's so exciting about the film coming out and all that stuff. But that's so I think one of the reasons why his human story is so impactful is it's not like from the very beginning, they didn't know that they were creating something that was going to be this rich and live forever. And they have different perspectives on that in their lives. For Jack, very specifically, it's about taking care of his family.
And Jack walked away, I think, because he was so creative, he actually thought he could just do it again.
He
right?
did.
He walked away because he's like, oh, well, I did it once, I can do it again with New Gods or what have you, or later on with Pacific. Unfortunately, life and history don't work that way.
And this conversation, by the way, is exactly what I was trying to get to in the panel, is that these characters are larger than life. They're mythology. They're like gods who walk among us. Iron Man and the Avengers and all of these characters that were the product of Lee and Kirby's imagination. And they were created by human beings. And human beings are quirky, weird, temperamental creatures, and that Abraham and Danny, in their biographies of Stan Lee, really unearthed some of the hidden layers behind the public persona. And Fred and Crystal in their play King Kirby, which I saw a few years ago and really got to me because they really did manage to sort of peel back the mythology of Jack Kirby and get to what motivated him as a working man, a husband, a father, a creator, a person who was trying to put food on the table by working in this kind of weird industry. And neither of these guys, I think, envisioned where these creations would end up at. And so in our conversation in the panel, I think we spent a lot of time looking at these particular moments in their biography where these guys, came together and clashed and had different views of the situation. And I think that goes a long way toward explaining why even 50 years down the road, we still don't have a very clear picture of this, because we have two narrators who are each, reliable in certain ways and unreliable in other ways. So
I think, Rob, so, what you said is right, that, thank you, that we peel back and show the humanity. But nonetheless, I think they have attained mythic status just like the characters they created. Look at the words we're using. They clashed, the rise and fall, the marvelous life, the King Kirby. These, I don't necessarily talk about like my friends or relatives with royal adjectives,
So I imagine, or I'm guessing that they weren't friends.
Well, that's a complicated story. They weren't really that, no. In short, no, they were not friends. They were collaborators, at times more strained than at other times, but no, they didn't really socialize.
They were friends, but I think they were in love. I don't think they were friends, but I think there was an intense relationship.
Well, it was certainly an intense relationship, although, well, yes, we can get into all kinds of detail. Both Danny and I wrote whole books about this, but yeah, it's they were not. It's not simple as them being friends, because they were not.
And one of the curious things about the relationship is when they first met, Jack was in charge. He was the art director of Marvel Comics, and Stan was like a 16-year-old office boy who was related to the owner of the company. And then years later, Stan's in charge. He's the editor-in-chief, and Jack is the artist that he brings in. So there's sort of inversion between like their first encounter, where it's clearly like one person is the dominant figure in that, and then later that gets reversed. That's part of the dynamic. That's what makes it different from like a classic frenemies like Lennon and McCartney were basically on equal footing when they met. And this relationship has had like 50 years of ups and downs, and that turbulence is part of what I think contributed to the amazing work.
And I think Stan saw himself as a victim as much as Jack did. I think Stan felt that he was abused by his cousin who owned the company, and then by the successive corporations that owned it. As much money and as much fame and admiration as he may have had, I think he always felt that even he was treated as just another cog in the machine too.
Yeah.
But Stan was with it, till the very end in 2018. He was larger than life in his 90s. I think that he thrived on all that attention.
Oh, sure.
To an extent. He also kept doing a lot of stuff because he needed money. He needed liquid cash. You think of him as rich, and he was in some ways, but he needed liquid cash for various things that you can read about in my book. So he did love being around the fans to a certain extent, but after a certain point, when he was in his 90s, especially when he started getting around 94, 95, he really didn't want to be doing it anymore. And, but that's a separate story.
Well, although I've been with him on stages at conventions, and you're right, that last year and a half, definitely the sense of this old man being schlepped around. But I had, especially one particular con where I was moderating, and he looked like he was going to collapse backstage. And on stage, he came to life. It was supposed to be like a half-length panel, and he insisted on continuing. There was something about being loved. My line about it is, from what you know of Stan Lee, do you think he'd rather die at home alone in bed, which he kind of did, or drop dead in front of 10,000 people cheering him? I think he would probably prefer the latter, but he got the former.
Yep.
It says a lot about the personalities too, because Jack was very much didn't seek that as much, and he very much felt like, this is who I am. And I think that's something that, at least in the play that we explored, frustrated him about Stan, and frustrated him about needing all that adoration. Stan is an incredible adapter. You see it in any interview whenever he talks. I think it's Kevin Smith. There was this incredible interview he gave, and all of a sudden I felt like he was just, Kevin, you're the best. I love you so much. But the interview was really about him. And so Jack, it almost felt like conversations often were like that. However, what made the relationship work from what you got to know of them and or at least took forward in the play, is they are extremely prolific. They can call each other, they can make things happen together, and they want to keep creating and put out more and more. And that's really important in a collaboration.
I remember interviewing him several times, and he did mention Jack Kirby, saying that it was his collaborator. Did it seem like more later in his life that he was more willing to mention Kirby?
Well, throughout his life, he did cite Kirby a lot. He talked Kirby up to high heaven, but he would never go so far as to say, Jack created these characters. Not saying that Jack necessarily did, but Jack resented that was not the line, that there was, Jack, that Stan would say, well, Jack was the greatest artist, but it would never be Jack was the greatest writer/artist. Even though, this is way more detailed than we need to get into, when they were collaborating, it was not Stan writing a script and then Jack drawing from that script. It was, something or other would happen, and then Jack would sit down and just basically write the story in terms of visuals. So Jack never liked the fact that he was pigeonholed as just the artist, just the hired gun. No matter how much Stan said he was the best artist, he saw himself as a cartoonist, as somebody who did art and writing, and really resented that was not the way he was characterized by Stan.
Very often, Stan would give interviews on TV or to the press, and he would, give credit to Jack, and then that would get either simplified by a reporter or left out on the cutting room floor because somehow people who are not consumed with comics, this is less true now, but it still happens, feel that to say that two people created a character is just too complicated for the general public to understand. That there's got to be a Walt Disney, there's got to be a George Lucas, and the idea that these people needed help or collaborators just seemed maybe too long for a 60-second spot or too complicated for whoever they thought the audience was. So I'd say a lot of that Stan did not have control over.
Part of what makes this such an explosive issue within the comics world is that so many of us who are either fans or creators or writers and sayers of things about comics, we relate to the underdog character of Jack Kirby as the creative voice that kind of gets second shrift to the big, gregarious self-promoter. We love Stan. Stan's great. He was this avuncular figure. He brought a lot of people into the realm of comics just by the force of his personality. And, you don't want to undersell that. But at the same time, you look at, in the elephant's graveyard of the comics industry is built on the bones of creators who've been screwed over and financially done out of their just rewards for financial rewards or prestige rewards for creating these characters. And you look at somebody like Kirby, and that outside of the industry, there aren't a lot of people that speak up for him, especially while Stan was alive and really commanding the spotlight, and not somebody that you wanted to go after because he's, such a popular, nice guy. And now, I think the scholarship that has come out, Abraham's book and Danny's book, and before that, Fred and Crystal's play, and a new book, a graphic novel biography of Jack Kirby by Tom Scully that just came out, is starting to just tell the other side of that story to the wider public. And it's like, we're never going to know because both of these guys are gone, and they're the only ones in the room that really knew what the actual story was. But just getting a sense to the lightly affiliated fandom and the movie fans and the people that have seen Stan, that Stan was a great guy. Stan did a huge amount for the industry of comics and for the medium of comics over his life. But there's also this other guy that deserves an awful lot of credit for making these characters somebody that we want to see on a giant screen over and over again in all of these movies.
I think in some ways there's almost been a backlash where since he's died, Stan, I don't know, maybe I'm hypersensitive to it, given my Marvel background, but it almost feels like Stan is discounted, and the creative ability he had and the creative contributions he made are discounted as if he was just some guy, cashing a check that for work that other people did. And he was great. He loved delegating work to other people. But I think in that, he had this fancy, luxurious mansion within which there was this simple room with crappy paneling and, where he kept his files in cardboard boxes. And I think that Depression era kid with a creative streak came out then. I think that gets discounted now. Not, as great as Jack was, and obviously without Jack, without any of those guys, there's none of this stuff. But I do think to say, oh, Stan built the brand, Stan was the cheerleader, Stan was the face, I think Stan was a pretty creative guy too.
I just think I'm just going to say, go ahead. On the point of view of my own journey, just as a 70s, 80s kid, growing up with Stan Lee Presents being blazoned across every Marvel comic, unfortunately, I think the course correction is to a certain extent necessary, and I can see why it would be maybe oversold, because Marvel really did oversell Stan, I think, with the panic of Kirby leaving them, and I think they really kind of doubled down on Stan as Marvel, and that just kind of carried through the rest of his life. And so, unfortunately, when you're a child and you get sold a story you later find out is a myth or partly BS, you have that adolescent reaction of F you, like you really want to tear down the idols, And I'm much older than a teenager now, so I have sorry, honey. To tell you, but so I have the maturity of age to sort of temper my enthusiasm, but there is a course correction, and it may overcorrect, but I do think the course correction was to a certain extent warranted.
Yeah, I get it.
Do you think that Comic-Con at home, do you think more people were watching this panel than they would at the convention center?
No idea.
Isn't that, can we tell that from YouTube? Isn't that fairly easily determined?
Well, don't forget, people. The difference is that it, at the actual at a real world convention, people have to, it's at the panel's at 3 o'clock, and we got to be there at 3, and if we don't, we miss it. This is available on an ongoing basis on YouTube. So I guess we won't know for a week or two what the initial things are. I know there's 100 panels I wanted to go see in the past 2 days that I have not, that I tell myself, I'll get to that next week,
Yeah, having it not be a zero-sum thing where it's like, well, if I go to see this one, then I'm going to miss the 5 other ones that I want to see, is in the long run going to help us, because hopefully the people that are interested in this topic, and frankly, a lot of the old-time fans that would really take a passionate interest in this subject are not the people that make the very arduous and expensive trek out to San Diego every year the way they used to. So I think we might reach a lot more of those fans through this way. But you miss the excitement of being in the room. I mean, even if we were in a room of 60 or 75 people that really dug this stuff, I guarantee you the Q&A would be lit. There would be people throwing stuff at each other, and it's like it's not quite the same to do it on Zoom.
Anything else y'all would like to add?
Buy my book. Buy everybody's book.
Yes, buy everybody's book.
Please.
And our audio books.
You want to put your website or?
AbrahamRiesman.com, and it's I before E, but if you misspell it, it redirects anyway.
DannyFingeroth.com, and I'm all over Facebook.
I'm Rob Salkowitz. You can follow me at Rob Salk. I write for Forbes, ICB2, and a bunch of other things. And I have a piece in a great book by Kim Munson on comics in museums that just came out last week.
Well, great. Well, I'm Chris Morrow. I'm Comic-Con at home, and I'm remotely connected at the Tin Fish. And I guess, given the panel that's going on, we'll let Stan have the last word. See what he says.
He always did.
I think you said enough said.
There you go.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chris.
Stay well, everybody.